I still remember the exact moment my heart shattered into a million pieces. It wasn't when I caught him cheating, or even when he packed his things and left. It was when he looked me directly in the eyes, his face twisted with cruel amusement, and said those words I still hear echoing in my nightmares. "No one will ever love you." He laughed then, a sound so callous it seemed to scrape against my soul. "You're pathetic, Emily. You really think anyone else could put up with your insecurities? Your neediness? I was the best you'll ever get, and even I couldn't stand it anymore." The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, so certain, made me believe him. In that moment, standing in our apartment surrounded by the wreckage of our 3-year relationship, I believed every word. And for months afterward, I continued to believe him. But this isn't a story about heartbreak. It's a story about what happens when someone underestimates the woman they've destroyed. It's about patience, strategy, and the sweetest kind of justice. Because while Derek thought he'd broken me beyond repair, he had actually created something new, someone calculating, someone patient, someone who would make him regret ever having met me. When I tell you I found my soulmate and Derek is still single, that's not even the beginning of my revenge. That was just a delightful bonus. Let me take you back to the beginning. To understand the magnitude of what Derek did, you need to know how deeply I had loved him, how completely I had given myself to our relationship. We met during my final year of college. I was studying graphic design, drowning in projects and portfolio deadlines, when my roommate dragged me to a house party. "You need a break," she insisted, "and possibly to get laid." I wasn't planning on either, but then Derek appeared, offering me a drink with a smile that made my stomach flip. He had these intense hazel eyes that seemed to focus entirely on me, like I was the only person worth seeing. In a crowded room of drunk college students, he made me feel special. Looking back, I should have recognized that as his superpower, the ability to make women feel chosen. "You don't seem like the typical party girl," he said, leaning against the wall beside me. "What gave it away? The fact that I'm hiding in the corner?" He laughed, and the sound warmed me from the inside out. "That, and you've been nursing that same beer for the past hour while looking like you're plotting escape routes." I smiled despite myself. "You've been watching me for an hour?" "Hard not to," he replied, his eyes never leaving mine. "You're the most interesting person here." And just like that, I was hooked. It seems so cliché now, the shy girl falling for the charming guy who notices her, but Derek had a way of making every tired romantic trope feel genuine. He asked about my design projects with what seemed like genuine interest. He told me about his ambitions in finance, how he wanted to start his own investment firm someday. We talked until the party died around us, and when he asked for my number, my heart raced with a mix of excitement and disbelief. Our relationship progressed quickly. Within 3 months, he was practically living at my apartment. By 6 months, we'd made it official and signed a lease together. My friends thought it was fast, but Derek had answers for everything. "When you know," he'd say, kissing my forehead. Why waste time when we could be building our life together? I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because when Derek Matthews looked at you with those intense eyes and told you that you were special, that you were different, that you were the one, it felt like the absolute truth. For the first year, everything was perfect. He supported my freelance design work, celebrated my victories, and comforted me through rejections. I did the same for him as he navigated the cutthroat entry-level world of finance. We were a team, or so I thought. The changes came gradually, so subtle I barely noticed them accumulating. It started with small criticisms disguised as concern. "That shirt makes you look a little wide in the hips, babe. The blue one flatters you more. Maybe you should reconsider that client project." Their brief sounds like a nightmare, and you know how anxious you get when you're overcommitted. "Your friend Megan seems a bit toxic, don't you think? I notice you're always drained after spending time with her." Each comment seemed to come from a place of love, of wanting what was best for me. And over time, I started to see myself through Derek's eyes, as someone who needed guidance, who made better decisions when he was involved. I stopped wearing certain clothes. I turned down projects that might have challenged me. I saw my friends less and less, until my world shrank to just Derek and the occasional approved social gathering where he could shine as the charming boyfriend. By our second anniversary, I had a successful freelance business that was growing steadily, but I felt strangely hollow. Something was wrong, but I couldn't identify it. When I tried to talk to Derek about my feelings, he had a way of turning the conversation around. "You're probably just stressed about work," he'd say. "Or maybe it's hormonal. You always get a little emotional before your period." And I'd accept his explanation because the alternative, that something fundamental was broken between us, was too frightening to consider. I'd invested everything in this relationship. Derek had become my world, partly by design, and the thought of losing him terrified me. The first time I found evidence he was cheating, I convinced myself I was imagining things. A strange text notification that he quickly dismissed. The scent of unfamiliar perfume. Late nights at work that couldn't be verified. I buried my suspicions because confronting them meant confronting the possibility that our entire relationship was built on lies. But then came Sophia. I discovered her existence through the most mundane of circumstances. Derek had asked me to drop off his gym bag at his office. He'd forgotten it at home, and there was an important client he wanted to impress with a lunch workout. Always eager to help, I agreed without hesitation. The receptionist at his firm greeted me with a smile. "You must be Sophia. Derek mentioned you'd be stopping by." My heart stuttered in my chest, but my face remained neutral. "Actually, I'm Emily, his girlfriend." The flash of confusion, followed by pity that crossed her face, told me everything I needed to know. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I just assumed." He talks about Sophia quite a bit, and when he said someone was dropping off his gym bag, I forced a smile. "Easy mistake. I'll make sure he gets this. Thanks." I left the building in a daze, the gym bag suddenly heavy in my hands. I didn't confront Derek immediately. Something inside me, some newly awakened instinct for self-preservation, told me to wait, to gather information, to be strategic for once in our relationship. That night, when Derek returned home late again, I played my part perfectly. I asked about his day with just the right amount of interest. I didn't mention the receptionist or the name Sophia. I watched him lie to my face with practiced ease and realized he'd probably been doing it for years. The next morning, while he showered, I did something I'd never done before. I checked his phone. The passcode was my birthday, which seemed like the final ironic twist of the knife. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Not just one affair, but several. Messages to different women, all with the same patterns of charming introduction, intense pursuit, and established routine. I was just one of many, and from what I could tell, I wasn't even the main one anymore. That honor seemed to belong to Sophia, an investment banker at a rival firm whose conversations with Derek spanned months. What broke me wasn't just the cheating. It was the realization that our entire relationship had been a performance. The man I loved, the man I'd rebuilt my entire life around, had never really existed. I took photos of the most damning messages, then carefully returned his phone to the bedside table before he finished his shower. My hands were shaking, but my mind was strangely calm. I needed more information before I decided what to do. Over the next week, I lived a double life. On the surface, I was the same devoted girlfriend. But beneath that facade, I was investigating the man I thought I knew. I followed him one evening when he said he was meeting clients. Instead, he met Sophia at an upscale restaurant downtown, where they disappeared into a private dining room. I watched through the window as he held her hand across the table, looking at her with the same intense focus he once directed at me. I hired a private investigator, an expense that drained my savings, but I needed to know the full extent of his betrayal. The report I received confirmed my worst suspicions and revealed new ones. Derek had been cheating throughout our relationship, with at least 5 different women that could be confirmed. He had a pattern. He targeted women who were successful in their own right, but emotionally vulnerable in some way. Women who would be flattered by his attention, and who had resources he could subtly leverage. The investigator also uncovered financial irregularities. Derek had been borrowing from our joint account, small amounts at first, then larger sums as time went on. He'd also opened credit cards in my name, carefully intercepting the mail so I'd never see the statements. The total debt he'd accumulated in my name was staggering. I sat in my car outside our apartment building, reading the investigator's report with growing nausea. My relationship wasn't just a lie, it was a calculated con. I had been systematically manipulated, emotionally abused, and financially exploited by the man who claimed to love me. That night, I confronted him. I waited until he came home, later than usual and smelling of expensive perfume. I was sitting at our dining table, the investigator's report and printouts of his text messages spread before me like a roadmap of betrayal. "We need to talk," I said quietly as he walked in. His expression shifted instantly, surprise followed by calculation, then settling on concerned affection. It was fascinating to watch now that I could see the performance. "What's wrong, babe? You look upset." He moved to touch my shoulder, but I flinched away. "Don't." I gestured to the papers on the table. I know about Sophia, and Jessica, and Amelia, and the others. For a moment he froze. Then his shoulders slumped in what looked like defeat, but I now recognized as just another act, the contrite boyfriend ready to beg forgiveness. Emily, I can explain— Save it, I interrupted. I also know about the credit cards, the loans, the money you've been taking. It's all here. I tapped the investigator's report. What I don't know is why. Why me, Derek? What did I ever do to deserve this? His facade cracked then, just for a moment, and I saw something ugly flash in his eyes. But he quickly regained control, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of distress that I'd once found endearing. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he said, his voice soft. I never meant to hurt you. But you did. Repeatedly. Deliberately. I love you, Em. The other women, they didn't mean anything. They were mistakes. And the money. I was going to pay it all back. I just needed to make some investments first. I laughed, and the sound was hollow even to my own ears. You're still lying. Even now, with all the evidence in front of you, you're still trying to manipulate me. Something shifted in his demeanor then. The pretense of remorse vanished, replaced by cold calculation. What do you want, Emily? Money? I don't have it. Revenge? Good luck proving anything legally. Those cards are in your name, and you'll look like a vindictive ex trying to cause problems for me. I want you to leave, I said simply. Tonight, pack your things and get out of my apartment. The lease was in my name, a small blessing I hadn't appreciated until that moment. Derek's expression darkened. You're making a mistake. You think you can just throw away 3 years? Who's going to want you after this? You're damaged goods, Emily. Needy, insecure, clingy. I put up with it because I felt sorry for you. Each word was a dagger, precisely aimed at my deepest insecurities. Insecurities he had carefully cultivated over our years together. I felt myself shrinking under his assessment, doubt creeping in even in the face of his betrayal. I gave you confidence, he continued, his voice dropping to a gentle, reasonable tone that was somehow more frightening than if he'd shouted. I helped you build your business. I introduced you to clients. Without me, you'll fall apart within months. You know that, don't you? For a terrifying moment, I believed him. But then my eyes fell on the evidence spread across the table, proof that this man had systematically deceived me, used me, and planned to discard me once I was no longer useful. Something hardened within me. Get out, I repeated, standing up. Now. His face contorted with anger. You ungrateful bitch. Do you think anyone else would have stayed with you this long? Do you think anyone else could love someone as fundamentally broken as you? I remained silent, watching as he packed a bag with quick, angry movements. At the door, he turned back, his expression a mixture of contempt and pity. No one will ever love you, he said with absolute certainty, and then he laughed, a cold, cruel sound that seemed to echo in the sudden emptiness of the apartment. You're pathetic, Emily. You really think anyone else could put up with your insecurities? Your neediness? I was the best you'll ever get, and even I couldn't stand it anymore. The door slammed behind him, leaving me alone with the wreckage of my life. The first week after Derek left was a blur of pain and practical problems. I changed the locks, froze the joint account, and contacted credit card companies to report fraud. I was told repeatedly that since the cards were in my name and I had no proof Derek had opened them without my knowledge, I would likely be responsible for the debt. The legal consultant I spoke with wasn't optimistic about my chances of holding Derek financially accountable without significant legal expenses I couldn't afford. I cried until I had no tears left. I called in sick to my freelance contracts and barely left my bed. The apartment felt both empty and suffocating, filled with memories of a relationship that had been a lie from the start. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Derek, alternating between vicious attacks and pleas for reconciliation. I read them all but responded to none. Each message was further evidence of his manipulation. He was trying different strategies to see which would hook me back in. On the 10th day, something changed. I woke up and felt different. The pain was still there, a constant ache in my chest, but alongside it was something new, a cold, clear anger that sharpened my thoughts. I got out of bed, showered for the first time in days, and really looked at myself in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My eyes were swollen from crying, my skin pale, my body thinner from barely eating. But it wasn't just the physical changes that shocked me. It was the defeat in my expression, the way I held myself as if expecting another blow. No more, I whispered to my reflection. No fucking more. I spent that day cleaning the apartment, opening windows to let fresh air sweep away the stale sadness. I collected every trace of Derek, photos, gifts, clothes he'd left behind, and stuffed them into garbage bags. Not to return to him, but to dispose of completely. I didn't want a single reminder of him in my space. As I worked, my mind began to clarity. Derek hadn't just hurt me emotionally. He had systematically dismantled my self-worth, isolated me from support systems, and left me financially vulnerable. This wasn't just a bad breakup, it was calculated abuse. And yet, despite everything he'd done, he was walking away unscathed. He still had his job, his friends, his reputation. He was probably already fully invested in his relationship with Sophia, spinning tales about his crazy ex to garner sympathy. The unfairness of it burned in my chest. That night, sitting alone in my cleaned apartment, surrounded by garbage bags full of memories ready to be discarded, I made a decision. Derek Matthews would not get away with what he'd done to me. Not this time. Not this woman. But I wouldn't confront him directly. That would just give him another opportunity to manipulate and demean me. No, my revenge would need to be more subtle, more comprehensive. I would need to be patient, strategic, and absolutely ruthless. The next morning, I called the private investigator again. I need more information. I told him. Everything you can find on Derek Matthews. Professional background, family connections, current routines, vulnerabilities. Especially vulnerabilities. That's going to cost you, he warned. I'll find the money, I said firmly. This is important. While waiting for the investigator's expanded report, I focused on rebuilding myself. I contacted my lapsed clients with apologies and promises of better work than ever before. I reached out to friends I'd neglected during my relationship with Derek, careful not to dump my trauma on them, but genuinely seeking to reconnect. I found a therapist who specialized in emotional abuse and committed to weekly sessions. Most importantly, I started planning. I created a detailed spreadsheet of what I knew about Derek, his habits, his weaknesses, his ambitions, his fears. I analyzed our relationship for patterns, looking for vulnerabilities I could exploit. Derek's greatest asset was his charm, his ability to make people feel special while hiding his true nature. His greatest weakness was his ambition. He wanted success and recognition so badly that he cut corners and took risks. And his blind spot was his arrogance. He truly believed he was smarter than everyone around him, which made him careless. When the investigator's expanded report arrived 2 weeks later, I had already formulated the skeleton of a plan. The new information helped me fill in the details. Derek had been lying about his background. He hadn't graduated with honors from Wharton as he claimed. He'd attended a state school on academic probation and barely graduated. His family wasn't wealthy New England stock. His father was a factory worker in Ohio and his mother a school lunch lady. He'd created an entirely fictional history to impress employers and women alike. More interestingly, he was on thin ice at his firm. Despite his confident claims about being on a partnership track, he had actually been passed over twice for promotion and was known for taking credit for others' work. He'd also been warned about his excessive expenses and questionable client entertainment costs. Sophia, it turned out, wasn't just any colleague from a rival firm. She was the daughter of one of the senior partners at Derek's company. Dating her was clearly a strategic move to secure his professional future. The report also detailed his current routines now that he was living with Sophia in her downtown condo. He frequented certain bars, maintained a gym membership he rarely used, and had standing reservations at restaurants where financial industry people congregated. Most valuable of all, the investigator had uncovered evidence of actual financial fraud beyond Derek's personal scams. He had been manipulating client accounts in minor ways, nothing that had triggered formal investigations yet, but definitely in ethical gray areas that could destroy his career if exposed. "This is better than I hoped," I murmured as I read through the documentation. The investigator had been thorough, providing screenshots, copies of records, and detailed notes about sources. That night, I finalized my plan. It would take time, months, possibly a year or more. It would require me to set aside my emotions and think strategically. It would push me to become someone Derek would never recognize, someone confident, calculating, and completely immune to his manipulation. But when it was done, Derek Matthews would lose everything he valued: his career, his reputation, his relationship, and his arrogant belief that he could use women with impunity. I titled the document Project Karma and set a timeline. Phase 1 would focus on rebuilding myself, financially, emotionally, and socially. I needed to be stronger than I'd ever been to execute the later phases. Phase 2 would involve strategic positioning, placing myself where I could gather more information and influence outcomes without alerting Derek to my intentions. Phase 3 would be the systematic dismantling of Derek's carefully constructed life, revealing his fraudulent past, exposing his professional misconduct, and ensuring that Sophia and any other women in his life knew exactly who they were dealing with. The final phase would be living well, the ultimate revenge. I would build a life so full and successful that Derek's prediction would be revealed as the desperate lie it was. Someone would love me, truly love me, and Derek would watch from the sidelines, alone and diminished. As I closed my laptop that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before I met Derek, a sense of purpose, of righteous determination. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years, I was making my own choices, setting my own course. Derek had tried to break me, but instead, he'd forged me into something much more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain from his downfall. I slept peacefully that night, dreaming of justice. Phase 1 of Project Karma began immediately. I needed financial stability before anything else, so I poured myself into my freelance design business with new intensity. I reached out to former clients, offered competitive rates for new projects, and started actively networking in the design community again. To my surprise, work flowed in quickly. It seemed that without Derek's subtle undermining of my confidence and his helpful suggestions that often limited my opportunities, I was much more effective at marketing myself. I had always been talented, that was never the issue, but now I allowed myself to recognize and leverage that talent without second-guessing every decision. Within 2 months, I had enough steady clients to cover my expenses and start repaying the fraudulent debt Derek had left me with. I consulted with a financial advisor who specialized in helping women recover from financial abuse, and together we created a structured plan to rebuild my credit and savings. Emotionally, the work was harder. Therapy sessions often left me drained as I uncovered the extent of Derek's manipulation and my own complicity in allowing it to continue. I had to confront difficult truths about why I had been vulnerable to someone like him in the first place. You had an insidious form of emotional abuse, my therapist explained during one particularly difficult session. He didn't just hurt you, he reconstructed your reality so that the abuse seemed normal, even deserved. I should have seen it, I said, wiping away tears. There were so many red flags. Abusers are skilled at what they do, Emily, and they specifically target people with certain vulnerabilities. Your capacity for empathy, your willingness to see the best in people, those are strengths, not weaknesses. He weaponized your virtues against you. Gradually, I began to separate Derek's cruel assessment of me from my own understanding of who I was. I hadn't been needy or insecure when we met. He had systematically created those insecurities to make me dependent on him. I wasn't fundamentally unlovable. He had isolated me to maintain control. The most challenging aspect of Phase 1 was rebuilding my social connections. Derek had slowly but effectively separated me from close friends, always with plausible reasons that seemed thoughtful at the time. Reconnecting meant admitting how completely I had allowed myself to be controlled. I started with Megan, my former best friend who Derek had convinced me was toxic, because she questioned the speed of our relationship. "Can we meet for coffee?" I texted her, half expecting to be ignored after nearly 2 years of minimal contact. Her response was immediate. "Yes. Tomorrow? 10 a.m. at Bluestone Cafe?" When I saw her waiting at an outdoor table, nervously checking her phone, something broke open inside me. I had missed her so much without even allowing myself to acknowledge it. "Meg," I said, my voice catching as I approached. She looked up, and her expression transformed from anxiety to relief. She stood and pulled me into a fierce hug. "I've been so worried about you," she whispered. "You disappeared." We talked for hours. I told her everything, the manipulation, the cheating, the financial abuse, and now my plans for rebuilding my life. I didn't mention Project Karma's later phases. That part of my plan needed to remain private. "I should have tried harder to reach you," she said, her eyes filled with tears. "I knew something was wrong, but he always answered your phone, always had an excuse why you couldn't talk." "It wasn't your fault," I assured her. "He was systematic about isolating me, and I let it happen." "No, Em, you were being abused." There's no letting it happen about it. Over the following weeks, I had similar conversations with other friends Derek had deemed negative influences. Not all relationships could be salvaged. Some friends had moved on, understandably hurt by my sudden disappearance from their lives. But enough people welcomed me back to create a small but solid support network. 4 months after Derek walked out, I could honestly say I was thriving professionally and healing emotionally. I had moved to a new apartment in a different neighborhood, smaller but entirely mine, with no memories of Derek in the corners. My business was growing steadily, and I was even beginning to date casually, though I kept these interactions light and superficial. I wasn't ready for anything serious, but I needed to practice recognizing red flags and enforcing boundaries. It was time for Phase 2 of Project Karma. The strategic positioning phase required me to take calculated risks and step far outside my comfort zone. I needed to place myself in Derek's orbit without directly engaging with him, close enough to gather intelligence and influence events, but distant enough that he wouldn't perceive me as a threat. The first step was changing my appearance. This wasn't about becoming more attractive or reinventing myself for Derek's benefit. It was about becoming unrecognizable to his casual glance. I dyed my light brown hair a rich auburn, invested in contact lenses instead of my usual glasses, and updated my wardrobe to project confidence and success rather than the approachable, slightly bohemian style I'd previously favored. Looking in the mirror after the transformation, I barely recognized myself, which was exactly the point. If Derek glimpsed me across a crowded room, he wouldn't immediately identify his ex-girlfriend. I would be just another attractive woman in the background of his life, invisible until I chose to be seen. The next step was more challenging. I needed access to Derek's professional world without directly crossing his path. Through my design business, I had worked with several financial services clients over the years. I leveraged these connections to secure a contract redesigning marketing materials for Blackwell Partners, a direct competitor to Derek's firm and the company where Sophia worked. This position gave me legitimate reasons to be in their office building, attend certain industry events, and access information about competitive practices. I made sure my client contact was on a different floor from both Derek and Sophia's departments, minimizing the chance of accidental encounters before I was ready. During my first month at Blackwell, I focused on building relationships and establishing myself as exceptionally competent and discreet. I arrived early, stayed late, and made a point of remembering personal details about the marketing team members I worked with. I joined them for happy hours occasionally, where I carefully guided conversations toward industry gossip without seeming too interested. The design is looking fantastic. My primary contact, Vanessa, told me after reviewing my initial concepts. The partners are already impressed, and they're not easily impressed. I'm glad to hear it, I replied with a professional smile. I've worked with several firms in this sector, but Blackwell seems to have a particularly strong corporate culture. We like to think so, she said proudly. Though there's always drama. Nature of the business. Type A personalities competing for the same resources. I've noticed that. Very different from the design world. I kept my tone casual as I added, I heard someone mention issues at Matthews & Carver recently. Something about client account irregularities? Matthews & Carver was Derek's firm, and while I knew from my investigator that there were whispers about problems, I needed more specific information. Vanessa leaned closer. Oh, it's a mess over there. Nothing public yet, but word is they're conducting internal audits of several junior associates. One of our analysts is dating someone in their compliance department. She looked around and lowered her voice further. Apparently, someone's been skimming from client accounts. Small amounts from multiple accounts adds up to quite a bit over time. My heart raced, but I kept my expression merely interested, not eager. That sounds serious. Career ending if they're caught. Which reminds me, we should schedule that meeting with the compliance team here to review the regulatory disclosures in the brochures. I nodded, steering the conversation back to professional matters while my mind processed this new information. Derek was being investigated, not yet formally accused but on the radar. This was valuable intelligence for Phase 3. As my contract at Blackwell continued, I became a familiar face in the building. I was careful to maintain a low profile when visiting floors where I might encounter Derek or Sophia, but I gradually expanded my network of contacts throughout the company. Each relationship provided pieces of information I carefully cataloged for future use. 2 months into my Blackwell contract, I had my first near miss with Derek. I was leaving a meeting with the marketing director when I spotted him waiting at the elevator bank, his back to me as he scrolled through his phone. I ducked into a side hallway, heart pounding, and took a moment to compose myself. This was a test. Would seeing him still affect me emotionally? As my pulse slowed, I realized I felt more contempt than pain. The man who had once seemed so impressive now looked ordinary, just another finance bro in an expensive suit, probably lying to everyone around him. Progress. The most valuable connection I made during Phase 2 came unexpectedly through a charity gala. Blackwell had purchased a table at a major fundraiser for children's education, and Vanessa invited me to fill an empty seat. "Great networking opportunity," she promised. "All the financial firms will be there." I accepted immediately, recognizing the potential value. I knew from my investigators' reports that Derek and Sophia would likely attend as representatives of their respective firms. This would be my first opportunity to observe them together in a public setting. I prepared meticulously for the event, selecting a midnight blue gown that was elegant but not flashy, designed to help me blend into the crowd of finance industry spouses and guests. I arrived with Vanessa and was introduced to her tablemates as our brilliant design consultant who's revolutionizing our client materials. Halfway through dinner, I excused myself to visit the restroom, taking a circuitous path that allowed me to scan the room. I spotted Derek and Sophia at a table near the stage, him in a tuxedo that I recognized as one I had helped pay for, her in a striking red dress that screamed old money. They looked perfect together, both laughing at something someone at their table had said. As I watched, Derek placed his hand possessively on Sophia's lower back and leaned in to whisper something in her ear. She smiled, but there was something tight about her expression that caught my attention. When Derek turned to speak to someone else, Sophia's smile dropped completely, her eyes suddenly distant and tired. Interesting. Not all was perfect in paradise. I continued to the restroom, careful to keep my face averted as I passed relatively near their table. In the elegant lounge area outside the restroom proper, I found Sophia touching up her makeup, her movements quick and slightly agitated. This was an unexpected opportunity, but one I needed to approach carefully. I selected a sink a few spaces away from her and began casually touching up my own makeup. "Beautiful event," I commented to no one in particular. Sophia glanced my way, her expression guarded but polite. "Yes, they've outdone themselves this year." "First time attending?" I asked, keeping my tone light and friendly. "Third, actually. Though sometimes it feels like these events all blur together." She applied another coat of red lipstick, then pressed her lips together, studying the effect. "I know what you mean. I'm here with the Blackwell team for work, really, but I'm supposed to be networking." I rolled my eyes slightly, creating an impression of someone slightly outside the finance world. Her expression warmed slightly. "You're not industry?" "Design consultant. Emily Chen." I offered my hand, using my Chinese grandmother's surname rather than my own. It was a precaution I'd decided on early in Phase 2, using my mother's maiden name professionally to make it harder for Derek to connect me with any work I was doing. "Sophia Aldridge." She shook my hand firmly. "Blackwell Partners." "I know," I smiled. "I've been working on your firm's new marketing materials. I've heard your name mentioned quite a bit. Everyone seems very impressed with you." She looked genuinely pleased at the compliment. "That's kind of you to say. It can be challenging to be taken seriously sometimes. I imagine finance still seems very much a boys' club." She laughed softly. "That's putting it mildly." She checked her watch and sighed. "I should get back. My date gets anxious when left alone too long." The slight edge in her voice when she mentioned her date, Derek, was unmistakable. This was an opening I couldn't ignore. "Maybe we could grab coffee sometime?" I suggested. "I'd love to hear more about your experience as a woman in finance. It would be helpful for understanding the audience for our marketing materials." Sophia looked surprised but not displeased. "Sure, that would be nice. Do you have a card?" I handed her my business card, designed specifically for my work at Blackwell, with my professional alias and no connection to my previous design work that Derek might recognize. "I'll email you next week," she said, tucking the card into her small clutch purse. "I should really get back now." "Of course." "It was lovely meeting you, Sophia." As she left, I remained in the restroom a few minutes longer, processing what had just happened. I had come to the gala hoping to observe Derek and Sophia from a distance. Instead, I had made direct contact with her, something I hadn't planned to do until much later in my strategy. Was this a dangerous acceleration of my timeline or an unexpected opportunity? I decided it was the latter. Sophia Aldridge was clearly not as enamored with Derek as he probably believed. The subtle signs of discontent I'd observed suggested their relationship might already be strained. If I could establish a genuine connection with her, position myself as a friendly colleague rather than a potential threat, I might gain insights and influence that would be invaluable for Phase 3. I returned to my table, careful to approach from a direction that kept me out of Derek's line of sight. Throughout the remainder of the evening, I occasionally glanced their way, noting how Derek dominated conversations at their table, while Sophia's engagement seemed to wane as the night progressed. By the time the gala ended, I had revised Phase 2 of Project Karma. Developing a relationship with Sophia would become a priority, not to use her directly against Derek, which would be cruel to someone who was likely another of his victims, but to better understand the current state of his life and potentially protect her from the worst of his manipulations. 3 days after the gala, Sophia emailed me to suggest coffee the following week. We met at a small cafe equidistant from our offices, and what I had intended as a brief professional conversation extended into a 2-hour discussion covering everything from workplace sexism to our favorite travel destinations. Sophia was intelligent, ambitious, and surprisingly funny once she relaxed. I found myself genuinely enjoying her company, which complicated my feelings somewhat. This woman was with the man who had systematically destroyed my life, and yet I couldn't bring myself to dislike her. If anything, I felt a growing concern that she was trapped in the same destructive cycle I had experienced. "How long have you been with your boyfriend?" I asked casually as our conversation turned more personal. "About 8 months," she replied, stirring her latte. "We work in the same industry, different firms. It's convenient in some ways, complicated in others." "I can imagine. Does he understand the pressure you're under as a woman in finance?" Her hesitation before answering told me everything. "He says he does. He's very supportive of my career. In theory. But not in practice," I prompted gently. She sighed. "It's not that simple. He has very traditional ideas sometimes. About relationships, about how I should present myself. He means well. Derek means well." How many times had I said those exact words to myself while ignoring red flags? "It can be hard to balance a demanding career with someone else's expectations," I offered, keeping my tone neutral. "Exactly." She looked relieved to be understood. "And lately, he's been stressed about work. There are some issues at his firm, reviews, performance concerns. He says it's all politics, but he's been—" She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable sharing too much. "Difficult?" I suggested. "Intense," she corrected, loyal even in her obvious discomfort. "Anyway, enough about my relationship drama. Tell me more about your design philosophy. The concepts you've created for Blackwell are unlike anything we've had before." I allowed the subject change, recognizing that pushing too hard would only make her defensive. Over the following weeks, Sophia and I developed what felt like a genuine friendship. We met for coffee regularly, occasionally joined by Vanessa or other Blackwell colleagues. I was careful never to criticize Derek directly or show too much interest in him, instead focusing on establishing myself as someone Sophia could trust. Meanwhile, my strategic positioning continued in other areas. Through careful networking, I secured invitations to industry events where Derek would be present, always maintaining enough distance that he never noticed me. I cultivated relationships with people at his firm, presenting myself as a potential contractor interested in expanding my portfolio of financial clients. 6 months after Derek had walked out of my apartment, I had successfully positioned myself at the periphery of his professional and personal life. I had a growing design business, a network of contacts throughout the financial industry, and, most valuably, the trust and friendship of the woman he was currently manipulating. I had also gathered significant intelligence about his vulnerabilities. 1. The internal investigation at his firm was intensifying, with Derek as one of several associates under scrutiny. 2. His relationship with Sophia was showing increasing strain, with her family, particularly her influential father, expressing reservations about him. 3. He had been passed over for another promotion, creating financial pressure as he attempted to maintain the lifestyle he felt entitled to. 4. He had begun exhibiting the same pattern of subtle control with Sophia that he had used with me, criticizing her clothes, questioning her friendships, suggesting she reduce her work hours. Derek Matthews was overextended, under investigation, and increasingly desperate to maintain his facade of success. The foundation of his carefully constructed life was cracking under pressure. It was time for Phase 3, the systematic dismantling of everything Derek valued. The execution of Phase 3 required precision timing and emotional discipline. I couldn't rush and risk exposing my intentions, nor could I hesitate and miss critical opportunities. Each action needed to appear unconnected to the others, a series of unfortunate coincidences rather than a coordinated campaign. I began with Derek's professional reputation. Through my network at Blackwell, I had learned that Matthews and Carver was planning a major client event, a weekend retreat where Derek would be presenting investment strategies to several high-net-worth prospects. Success at this event would potentially salvage his troubled position at the firm. I also knew, from careful conversations with Sophia and others, that Derek had been cutting corners in his research and misrepresenting certain investment returns. Nothing technically illegal, but certainly misleading and potentially damaging if exposed. 2 weeks before the retreat, I met with Vanessa to review the final designs for Blackwell's new marketing materials. As planned, the conversation drifted to competitive intelligence. "These look fantastic," Vanessa said, examining the portfolio presentations I'd designed. "The partners are thrilled. We're going to blow Matthews and Carver out of the water at the Richardson Accounts presentation next month." "I'm glad you're pleased," I replied, "though I've heard M&C is making a big push with their client retreat. Something about exclusive investment opportunities?" Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Yes, we've heard all about it. They're presenting some questionable return projections from what our analysts can tell. Especially that associate, what's his name? The one dating Sophia? Derek Matthews?" I suggested innocently. "That's him. Bit of a golden boy image, but word is he's on thin ice internally. His numbers don't add up, but they're giving him this chance to bring in new business." I nodded thoughtfully. "That's the challenge with financial marketing, isn't it? Balancing attractive projections with realistic expectations. I've seen firms get into real trouble when their materials promise returns they can't deliver. Exactly why compliance reviews all our materials so carefully." She gathered the designs into a folder. "Speaking of which, would you be available for an industry panel next week? The topic is Ethical Representation in Financial Marketing. Your perspective would be valuable." The panel was a perfect opportunity I couldn't have planned better myself. I'd be honored. "Who else will be participating?" "Compliance officers from several firms, including M&C, plus representatives from the Regulatory Commission. Very wonky stuff, but important." I accepted immediately, already formulating how I would use this platform. The panel would allow me to raise general concerns about misleading financial projections, concerns that would put the compliance team at M&C on high alert just before Derek's critical presentation. The panel went exactly as I'd hoped. Without mentioning specific firms or individuals, I presented a compelling case for stricter internal reviews of all client-facing materials, particularly projected returns. In my experience designing for multiple firms in this sector, I explained to the attentive audience, I've observed a troubling pattern of pressure on marketing teams to present increasingly aggressive projections. This creates significant regulatory risk and ultimately damages client trust when these projections fail to materialize. The compliance officer from Matthews and Carver took copious notes during my presentation and approached me afterward. "That was extremely insightful, Mrs. Chen. We're actually reviewing all our client materials ahead of a major retreat next weekend. Would you have time for a brief consultation? Your expertise would be invaluable." I carefully maintained a professional demeanor while internally celebrating this unexpected opportunity. "I'd be happy to help. My schedule is tight, but I could possibly review key materials tomorrow afternoon." The next day, I spent 3 hours with the M&C compliance team, highlighting potential issues in their marketing materials, particularly those prepared by Derek for the upcoming retreat. I never mentioned him by name, instead focusing on technical concerns and regulatory requirements. "These projected returns on page 17, I noted, pointing to figures I knew were Derek's work, appear significantly higher than industry standards without sufficient risk disclosure. That could trigger regulatory scrutiny." By the time I left, the compliance team was thoroughly alarmed and scheduling emergency reviews of all retreat materials. Derek's presentation would now face unprecedented scrutiny, with little time for him to make adjustments. The day before the retreat, Sophia texted me, "Rain check on coffee tomorrow?" Dee's presentation materials got rejected by compliance at the last minute. Complete chaos. He's furious and has to rebuild everything overnight. I responded with appropriate sympathy while inwardly savoring this first victory. Derek would either have to present watered-down, compliant materials that wouldn't impress clients, or risk his career by defying compliance. Either way, his golden opportunity was tarnished. He chose the latter. Through my contacts, I learned that Derek presented his original projections despite compliance warnings, telling his supervisors he would take personal responsibility for any issues. It was a desperate gamble to salvage his chance at impressing clients and securing his position. It was also exactly what I had anticipated. 3 days after the retreat, I anonymously submitted a tip to the Regulatory Commission, highlighting potential misrepresentations in Matthews and Carver's client materials and suggesting a review of Derek Matthews' client presentations specifically. The resulting investigation was swift and devastating. Derek was placed on administrative leave pending review, and clients who had attended the retreat received formal notifications that certain projections may have been misleading. This professional crisis triggered the next phase of Derek's unraveling. With his career in jeopardy, he became increasingly controlling in his relationship with Sophia, a pattern I recognized all too well. She began canceling our coffee meetings, offering vague excuses that grew more concerning over time. After 3 weeks of minimal contact, I received a text from her late one evening. "Can we meet? Not coffee. Maybe drinks? I could use a friend right now." We met at a quiet wine bar far from both our offices. Sophia looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and a tension in her shoulders I hadn't seen before. "I'm sorry for disappearing," she said after ordering a large glass of red wine. "Things have been complicated." "No apology necessary," I assured her. "Is everything okay? You seem stressed." She took a large sip of wine before responding. "Derek's having some professional issues. He says it's all politics and jealousy, but it's affecting everything. Our relationship, my work, my family relationships." "How so?" I asked gently. "He thinks everyone's against him, his firm, my father, even some of my friends. He's convinced there's some conspiracy to ruin him professionally." She lowered her voice. "He's become so paranoid, checking my phone, questioning where I've been, who I've talked to. Last night he suggested I might be undermining him somehow." My heart ached for her, despite knowing this was the inevitable result of Derek's character colliding with adversity. That sounds really difficult. And concerning. It is. But then he apologizes and says it's just the stress, that once this professional nightmare is over, everything will go back to normal. She twisted her napkin anxiously. "My father wants me to end it. Says Derek is a liability professionally and personally." "What do you want?" I asked, knowing the question would be novel to her. Derek would never have asked what she wanted. She looked startled, then thoughtful. "I'm not sure anymore. When things are good with Derek, they're really good. He can be so attentive, so charming. But lately, those moments are rare. Mostly he's angry, suspicious, or frantically networking to save his position. It's hard to make major relationship decisions during a crisis," I acknowledged. "But it's also important to trust your instincts." "My instincts," she repeated slowly. "My instincts have been screaming for weeks, but I keep ignoring them because he has explanations for everything." We talked for hours, with Sophia gradually revealing more about the controlling behaviors Derek had escalated since his professional troubles began. I was careful not to push her toward any specific decision, instead asking questions that helped her articulate her own concerns. "Has he isolated you from people who care about you?" I asked at one point. She considered this, then nodded slowly. "He doesn't like when I spend time with certain friends. Says they're jealous of our relationship or trying to undermine him. Even my family. He says my father never gave him a fair chance." "And do you find yourself changing your behavior to avoid his anger or disappointment?" "Constantly," she whispered. I dressed differently. I cut a client meeting short yesterday because he texted that he needed me. I've stopped mentioning certain topics that trigger his suspicions. By the end of the evening, Sophia was viewing her relationship through new eyes. I hadn't told her what to do. I didn't need to. Once she began articulating the reality of her situation, her own intelligence and self-respect would guide her decision. "Thank you for listening," she said as we prepared to leave. "I've been so confused, wondering if I was overreacting. It helps to say it all out loud." "That's what friends are for," I replied sincerely. Despite the complexity of our connection, I did consider Sophia a friend by this point. Her suffering at Derek's hands created a bond between us, even if she didn't know our full history. "I have some thinking to do," she said, her expression more determined than I'd seen in weeks. 3 days later, she called me, her voice stronger than it had been during our wine bar conversation. "I ended it with Derek last night." My heart raced, but I kept my voice calm. "How are you feeling?" "Relieved, mostly. Scared about the professional fallout. Our firms do business together, and his situation is already complicated. But I couldn't continue. Not after realizing how much I'd changed for him, how many red flags I'd been ignoring." "What did he say?" I asked, genuinely curious about Derek's reaction to rejection. Her laugh was bitter. "He didn't believe me at first. Thought it was some negotiation tactic. When he realized I was serious, he switched between begging and threatening so quickly it was dizzying. Told me I'd regret it, that no one would ever love me like he did." The familiar phrase sent a chill through me. Derek's playbook hadn't changed. "He's wrong," I said firmly. "And you're stronger than you realize." "I'm staying with my parents for a few days," she continued. "He's been calling constantly, alternating between tearful apologies and accusations that I've betrayed him. My father's considering a restraining order if it continues." This was escalating faster than I'd anticipated. Derek, facing professional ruin and now personal rejection, was unraveling completely. It was time for the final element of Phase 3. Throughout the previous months, I had carefully compiled a dossier on Derek Matthews, documentation of his financial fraud against me, evidence of his professional misconduct, and a detailed timeline of his pattern of emotional abuse with multiple women. I had intended to release this information strategically over time to maximize its impact. But Derek's increasingly erratic behavior toward Sophia changed my calculations. She needed protection, and the best way to provide that was to ensure Derek was too busy defending himself to pursue her. I created an anonymous email account and sent carefully selected portions of my evidence to 3 recipients. 1. The compliance department at Matthews and Carver, with documentation of Derek's manipulation of client accounts and fraudulent reporting. 2. The Human Resources Director, with evidence of Derek's pattern of pursuing women professionally for personal advantage, including screenshots of inappropriate messages he had sent to female colleagues. 3. Sophia's father, with financial records showing Derek's precarious personal financial situation and history of fraud, along with a brief, compassionate note suggesting his daughter might need protection from harassment. I did not include any information about my personal relationship with Derek or hint at my identity. This wasn't about exposing my story. It was about ensuring Derek faced consequences from multiple directions simultaneously, creating a perfect storm he couldn't navigate. The results were swift and devastating. Matthews and Carver terminated Derek's employment the following week, citing multiple serious violations of firm policy and industry regulations. The firm also reported his misconduct to regulatory authorities, triggering formal investigations that would effectively end his career in finance. Sophia's father, a powerful figure in the industry, ensured that Derek's reputation was quietly but thoroughly destroyed throughout their professional circles. No reputable firm would touch him. Most satisfyingly, Derek's carefully constructed image collapsed completely. Former colleagues and friends distanced themselves as the extent of his deception became clear. Without his career and high-income lifestyle, he lost the trappings that had made him appear successful and attractive. Through mutual connections, I learned that Derek was forced to move to a small apartment in an unfashionable neighborhood, that he was struggling to find employment even outside the financial sector, and that he had become something of a pariah in the social circles he had once dominated. 9 months after Derek had looked me in the eyes and told me no one would ever love me, he was alone, unemployed, and facing potential legal consequences for his financial misconduct. I had systematically dismantled everything he valued without him ever realizing I was involved. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, as I tracked the final implosion of Derek's life from a safe distance, I felt something unexpected, a profound sense of release. The anger and hurt that had fueled my meticulous revenge plan began to dissolve, replaced by a calm certainty that justice had been served and it was time to move forward. Phase 4 of Project Karma, Living Well, began with letting go. I maintained my friendship with Sophia, who recovered from her relationship with Derek with remarkable resilience. We never discussed him after his downfall, instead focusing on our careers and personal growth. Through her, I expanded my professional network and secured several prestigious design contracts that elevated my business to new heights. I also began dating again, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as I applied the hard-won wisdom from my experience with Derek. I recognized red flags immediately, enforced boundaries without apology, and trusted my instincts about character. 6 months after Derek's professional collapse, I met Michael at a gallery opening for one of my design clients. He was an architect with kind eyes and a quiet confidence that never veered into arrogance. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and genuine interest in each other's work and perspectives. Michael listened more than he spoke. He encouraged my independence rather than seeking to control it. He was secure enough in himself to celebrate my successes without feeling threatened by them. In short, he was everything Derek had pretended to be but wasn't. On our first anniversary, as we walked along the waterfront near my new apartment, Michael took my hand and looked at me with an expression of such genuine affection that it still startled me sometimes. "I've never felt this way about anyone before," he said simply. "You're extraordinary, Emily." "Even with all my complicated history?" I asked, thinking of the abbreviated version of my experience with Derek that I had shared with him months earlier. "Especially because of your history," he replied. "The strength it took to recover from that, to rebuild yourself, it's part of what makes you who you are." Later that evening, as Michael slept beside me, I opened my laptop and navigated to the Project Karma document I hadn't looked at in months. The detailed plans, the careful tracking of Derek's vulnerabilities, the calculated steps of my revenge, it all seemed to belong to another person now, someone I had needed to be during a specific, difficult chapter of my life. I deleted the document without hesitation, feeling the last weight of Derek Matthews lift from my shoulders. 2 years to the day after Derek had cruelly told me that no one would ever love me, I found myself in a relationship built on genuine love and respect, succeeding professionally beyond what I had imagined possible, and surrounded by authentic friendships. Derek, according to what little information still reached me through industry gossip, remained alone, working a series of low-level sales jobs, his reputation permanently tarnished. He had tried to rebuild his life in several cities, but found that the financial industry's memory was long and unforgiving. I thought about him rarely now, and when I did, it was with a detached pity rather than the consuming anger that had once driven me. He had been both my worst nightmare and, ironically, the catalyst for my transformation into someone stronger than I had ever imagined I could be. The final irony, of course, was that Derek would never know the role I played in his downfall. He would never understand that his cruel parting words had set in motion the very circumstances he now found himself in. He would believe himself the victim of bad luck, industry politics, and betrayal, never recognizing that he had created his own destruction by underestimating the woman he thought he had broken. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just living well, it's living so well that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant to your story. And sometimes karma needs a little help from someone with a spreadsheet, a plan, and the patience to watch it all unfold. 3 years after Derek walked out of my life, I was sitting across from Michael at an upscale restaurant downtown, celebrating my design agency's expansion. The small freelance operation I'd rebuilt from the ashes of my relationship with Derek had grown into Chen Design Group, a boutique firm specializing in financial and legal sector branding with 10 employees and an impressive client roster. "To the most talented designer in the city," Michael said, raising his champagne glass. "And to hiring employee number 11 next week." I smiled, clinking my glass against his. "To taking chances that pay off." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled back, one of the countless small things I loved about him. "You deserve every bit of this success, Em. You built something amazing from scratch." "With a little help," I acknowledged. Michael had been instrumental in connecting me with his architecture firm's clients when I was still struggling to expand beyond Blackwell. His support had always been practical as well as emotional, partnerships rather than rescues. "A good relationship is supposed to make both people stronger," he replied, echoing a conversation we'd had early in our relationship when I was still learning to distinguish between genuine support and Derek's manipulative version of help. After dinner, we strolled along the waterfront near our apartment. The night was perfect, warm with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt water and possibility. Michael seemed unusually quiet, his expression thoughtful. "Everything okay?" I asked, squeezing his hand. He stopped walking and turned to face me. "More than okay." He took both my hands in his. "Emily, these past 2 years have been the best of my life." You're brilliant, resilient, and somehow managed to be both the most determined and most compassionate person I've ever met." My heart began racing as he reached into his pocket and lowered himself to one knee. "I don't want to spend a day without you. Will you marry me?" The ring he held was simple and elegant, a single emerald surrounded by small diamonds in a vintage setting. Nothing flashy or ostentatious, just perfectly me. "Yes," I whispered, then louder, "Yes, absolutely yes." As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. This wasn't the desperate, clinging attachment I'd mistaken for love with Derek. This was a choice between two whole people, choosing to build something together. Later that night, as Michael slept beside me, I found myself thinking about the journey that had led me here. From the devastated woman sobbing on her apartment floor to a successful business owner engaged to a man who truly saw and valued me. I hadn't thought about Derek in months. He'd become increasingly irrelevant to my story, a painful chapter I'd survived rather than the defining trauma I'd once feared he would be. The last I'd heard through industry gossip, he'd left the city entirely, unable to rebuild his reputation after the comprehensive destruction of his career. I slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen to make tea, gazing out at the city lights while the water boiled. My phone buzzed with a late-night email notification, and I absently checked it, expecting a message from my West Coast clients. Instead, I froze, nearly dropping my phone. From Derek Matthews. Subject: Congratulations are in order. The message was brief but sent adrenaline coursing through my system. Emily, heard about your engagement and business success. Life has certainly changed for both of us since we parted ways. Perhaps we should catch up sometime. There are things I've learned that might interest you. DM. I sat down hard on the kitchen stool, my hands shaking. How did he know about my engagement? We had only told our closest friends and family, none of whom had any connection to Derek. And how had he found my new email address, carefully created after our breakup specifically to avoid any contact with him? Most unsettling was his tone, casual, almost friendly, as if we were old college acquaintances rather than a manipulator and the woman whose life he had systematically dismantled. Everything okay? Michael stood in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, concern etched on his face. I hesitated, then turned my phone toward him. Derek emailed me. Michael's expression hardened as he read the message. He knew the broad strokes of my history with Derek, though I'd never shared the full extent of Project Karma with him or anyone else. That's disturbing, he said finally. The timing especially. How would he even know we got engaged? We've only told people tonight. Michael sat beside me, placing a gentle hand on my back. Social media, maybe? Did anyone post congratulations? I shook my head. We haven't posted anything, and I haven't seen any posts from friends. I scrolled through my rarely used social media accounts to confirm. Nothing. Could he be bluffing? Fishing for a response? Maybe. But something felt wrong about that explanation. Derek was manipulative, not psychic. The timing was too precise. You don't have to respond, Michael said. In fact, I'd recommend against it. He's clearly trying to get a reaction. I nodded, though a part of me, the calculating part that had orchestrated Derek's downfall, was already analyzing potential motives behind his sudden reappearance. You're right. I'll delete it and block the address. I did exactly that, then turned off my phone entirely. Let's go back to bed. I refused to let him taint tonight. But as I lay beside Michael, sleep eluded me. Derek's message played on repeat in my mind. Things I've learned that might interest you. What could he possibly know that would interest me? And more importantly, why reach out now after years of silence? I told myself it was meaningless, a desperate attempt by a fallen man to regain some sense of power. But the seed of unease had been planted, and I knew from experience how quickly such seeds could grow. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Michael making coffee and the warm weight of purpose. I would not allow Derek Matthews to cast a shadow over my hard-won happiness. Whatever game he was playing, I would not be a participant. I shared this resolution with Michael over breakfast. I've decided to completely ignore Derek's email. He's trying to provoke a reaction, and the best response is no response. Michael nodded, relief evident in his expression. I think that's wise. Engaging with him in any way just opens a door better left closed. Exactly. Now let's talk about something much more important. When should we start looking at wedding venues? For the next week, I threw myself into both wedding planning and work with renewed enthusiasm. My agency was pitching for our largest potential client yet, a national bank undergoing a complete rebranding, and the project required my full attention and creativity. I had almost succeeded in pushing Derek's email from my mind when Sophia called. We had maintained our friendship over the years, though we saw each other less frequently now that we worked at different firms. She had been genuinely happy for me when I told her about my engagement. "Emily, do you have time for lunch today? There's something I need to discuss with you." Something in her tone, a controlled tension I recognized from our early friendship, put me immediately on alert. "Of course. Is everything okay? I'd rather talk in person. Giovanni's at 12:30? I'll be there." Giovanni's was our standard lunch spot, quiet enough for conversation, but public enough for difficult discussions. When I arrived, Sophia was already seated in a corner booth, a glass of wine in front of her despite the early hour. "That bad, huh?" I said, sliding into the seat across from her. She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sorry for the cryptic call. I didn't want to get into this over the phone." She took a deep breath. "Derek contacted me yesterday." My stomach dropped. "What? Why?" "He wanted to reconnect, supposedly. Said he's been doing a lot of soul-searching and wanted to make amends for how things ended between us." She rolled her eyes. "I told him I wasn't interested in his journey of self-discovery." "Good for you," I said, signaling the waiter for a glass of wine myself. "When did this happen?" "He called my office yesterday morning. Somehow got past my assistant by saying it was regarding a personal financial matter." She frowned. "But that's not why I wanted to meet. He mentioned you, Emily." I froze. "What did he say?" It was strange. He asked if we were still friends, and when I confirmed we were, he said something like, "You might want to ask her about our history sometime. There's more to that story than you probably know." She leaned forward. "What did he mean by that?" My mind raced. Was Derek somehow aware of my role in his downfall? Had he connected the dots between the anonymous tips and my friendship with Sophia? Or was this just another manipulation tactic? "Derek and I have a complicated history," I said carefully. "We dated for 3 years before you met him. It ended badly." Sophia's eyes widened. "You dated Derek? How did I not know this?" I had never told Sophia about my relationship with Derek. When we first became friends, revealing our connection would have compromised my plans. Later, after Derek's downfall, it seemed unnecessary and potentially hurtful to admit I had deliberately cultivated a friendship with her while concealing such significant information. "I didn't tell anyone in our professional circles about it," I explained, which was true. The breakup was extremely painful, and I wanted a clean separation between my personal and professional lives. She studied me intently. "But you knew I was dating him. You knew who he was when we met at that gala." I nodded, guilt rising in my throat. "Yes. And you never said anything." It wasn't a question. "I should have," I admitted. "At first, I didn't want to interfere in your relationship based on my personal experience. Later, when I saw concerning signs, I trailed off, unsure how to explain without revealing the full extent of my calculated approach." "You could have warned me," she said quietly. "I understand not wanting to seem like the crazy ex, but Emily, you knew what he was like, and you watched me walk right into it." Her hurt was palpable and entirely justified. In my focus on revenge against Derek, I had used Sophia, not maliciously, but strategically, without considering the full ethical implications of my silence. "You're right," I said finally. "I should have told you, and I'm truly sorry I didn't. It was wrong." She was quiet for a long moment, absently turning her wine glass. "What did he do to you, Emily? It must have been serious for you to completely erase him from your history." I hesitated, then decided Sophia deserved the truth, or at least most of it. "He was emotionally abusive. He isolated me from friends and family, undermined my confidence, gaslighted me about his infidelity. When I finally confronted him with evidence he was cheating, he cleaned out our joint accounts and left me with debt he'd accumulated in my name." Her expression softened slightly. "That sounds exactly like the Derek I eventually discovered." She paused. "He told me I was the only woman who truly understood him, that his exes were all unstable or vindictive." "Classic Derek," I said with a bitter smile. "Everyone before you is crazy, and you're the special one who's different. Until suddenly you're not. Did he tell you no one would ever love you?" she asked suddenly. The question hit me like a physical blow. "Yes, those exact words." "Me too. Right before I kicked him out of my condo." She shook her head. "He really does have a script, doesn't he?" Despite the tension between us, we shared a moment of recognition, the unique understanding between people who have survived the same specific form of abuse. Listen, I said carefully. There's something else you should know. I think Derek may be trying to cause trouble. He emailed me last week the night I got engaged. Somehow he knew about it immediately, before we had even announced it publicly. Sophia frowned. That's concerning. The timing of him contacting both of us after years of silence feels deliberate. Like he's planning something. Or he's just a bitter ex trying to disrupt our lives because his fell apart, she suggested. That's the most likely explanation. I agreed, though I wasn't convinced. Derek had always been calculating. His simultaneous reappearance in both our lives felt orchestrated rather than impulsive. Sophia sighed. Well, I've told him not to contact me again. My father's connections still carry weight in this city, even if Derek doesn't work in finance anymore. We finished lunch in a state of uneasy reconciliation. Sophia was understandably hurt by my years of silence about Derek, but our shared experience created a bond that wasn't easily broken. When we parted, she hugged me briefly. Congratulations on your engagement, by the way, she said. Michael is a good man. Nothing like Derek. The complete opposite. I agreed. And thank you for telling me about Derek's call. I appreciate the warning. That's what friends do, she replied with pointed emphasis. They warn each other about danger. I deserved that and accepted it with a nod. I won't keep important information from you again. I promise. As I walked back to my office, I mentally catalogued what I knew. Derek had contacted both Sophia and me within days of each other after years of silence. He had somehow known about my engagement immediately, and he had hinted to Sophia that there was more to my story than she knew. The strategic part of my brain, the part that had once methodically planned Derek's downfall, was on high alert. This wasn't random. Derek was making calculated moves, though his endgame remained unclear. When I reached my office, I closed the door and did something I hadn't done in years. I created a new document titled DM Situation Analysis. Old habits die hard. I listed what Derek might want. 1. Revenge for his professional downfall, though he likely had no proof of my involvement. 2. Financial gain. My business was now successful. Could he be planning some form of extortion? 3. Relationship disruption, simply to cause pain and chaos. 4. Reputation destruction, to damage my standing as I had damaged his. None seemed sufficient to explain his current approach. If he wanted simple revenge or to cause pain, there were more direct methods. If he wanted money, why not make explicit demands? And if he aimed to damage my reputation, why the personal outreach rather than public accusations? Unless he knew more than I thought he did. The phrase from his email echoed in my mind. Things I've learned that might interest you. Could Derek have somehow discovered my role in his downfall? The anonymous tips, the strategic positioning, the careful collection of evidence? I had been meticulous about covering my tracks, but Derek was intelligent and had years to reflect on his sudden, comprehensive ruin. I closed the document without reaching any conclusions, but the unease I'd been fighting intensified. Whatever Derek was planning, I needed to be prepared. That evening, I shared my concerns with Michael. I had already told him about my lunch with Sophia and Derek's surprising contact with her as well. You think he's figured out that you were behind his professional collapse? Michael asked, his expression troubled. I hesitated. Michael knew the general outline of my history with Derek, but I had never detailed the full extent of Project Karma. He believed Derek's downfall was primarily self-inflicted, with perhaps some anonymous reporting from me regarding the financial fraud. It's possible, I said carefully. I was careful, but Derek is smart and had time to piece things together. Michael was quiet for a moment, thinking. Even if he suspects, what could he actually do about it? You reported legitimate misconduct. The financial fraud was real. His behavior toward Sophia was real. You didn't fabricate anything. That's true, I acknowledged. But truth can be weaponized when presented selectively. If Derek realized I deliberately positioned myself in his professional circle specifically to gather information and influence events, it doesn't change the facts, but it changes the narrative. Would that matter at this point? You've built a solid reputation. Your business is thriving. We're getting married. Even if Derek tried to spread some story about you orchestrating his downfall, who would care? It would look like the bitter rambling of a failed ex. Michael's perspective was reasonable, but it didn't address my core concern, that Derek might have discovered more than just my professional maneuvering. If he somehow learned about my systematic dismantling of his life, my careful cultivation of Sophia's friendship for strategic purposes, my anonymous tips to multiple entities, The aggregate picture was more complicated than simple whistleblowing, but explaining that would require confessing the full extent of Project Karma to Michael, something I had deliberately avoided. I wasn't proud of how calculated I had been, how completely I had allowed the pursuit of revenge to consume me for nearly a year of my life. Michael knew me as resilient and determined, not coldly strategic and potentially manipulative. "You're probably right," I said finally. "I'm overthinking this. Derek's just trying to create drama because his life hasn't turned out the way he planned." Michael pulled me close. "Don't let him live rent-free in your head. That's what he wants." "You're right," I agreed, pushing down my lingering concerns. "Let's focus on wedding venues instead." For the next 2 weeks, I heard nothing more from Derek. No additional emails, no contact attempts through others. I began to think perhaps Michael was right. It had been a brief, failed attempt to disrupt my happiness rather than part of some larger strategy. Then came the client meeting that changed everything. Chen Design Group had reached the final round for the National Bank rebranding project. We were one of 3 agencies still in contention, and the presentation to their executive team would determine the winner. It was the largest potential contract in my company's history, one that would elevate us to a new tier of design firms. I had prepared meticulously, reviewing our concepts hundreds of times, rehearsing the presentation with my team until we could deliver it flawlessly. This was the culmination of years of hard work, exactly the type of project I had dreamed of landing when I first started rebuilding my career after Derek. The meeting was held at the bank's regional headquarters downtown. My team and I arrived early, setting up our presentation materials in the sleek conference room overlooking the city. The client's team began filing in, the marketing director we'd been working with, several VPs, and finally the CEO himself, indicating how significant this rebranding was to their corporate strategy. As they took their seats around the massive table, the marketing director began introductions. "We've also brought in a brand strategy consultant to help evaluate the final presentations. He has extensive experience in financial sector marketing and client psychology." The door opened and Derek Matthews walked in. I managed to maintain my professional expression through sheer force of will, but internally, everything froze. Derek was older, slightly thinner, with threads of gray at his temples, but his smile, that calculated, charming smile, was exactly the same. His eyes met mine with a flash of triumph so brief that no one else would have noticed. "Emily," he said smoothly, "what a surprise. I didn't realize you were with Chen Design Group." The lie was so blatant it took my breath away. There was no possibility this was coincidence. Derek had deliberately positioned himself as a consultant for this specific pitch. "Derek," I managed, my voice remarkably steady. "It's been a while." The marketing director looked between us. "You two know each other?" "We worked together years ago," Derek replied before I could speak. "Different industry, but it's a small world." He settled into a chair directly across from me. "Please don't let me interrupt. I'm just here to observe and provide feedback afterward." I felt my team's curious glances but focused on regaining my mental footing. This was a deliberate attack on my most vulnerable point, my professional reputation and the business I had built from nothing. Derek had positioned himself where he could directly influence whether we won this contract, and he had done so with careful planning. I had underestimated him. Again. The next 90 minutes were among the most challenging of my professional life. I delivered our presentation flawlessly, but with each slide, each concept explanation, I was acutely aware of Derek's evaluating gaze. He took notes continuously, his expression neutral but somehow threatening. When we finished, the bank's CEO led the appreciative applause. "Impressive work. Very cohesive narrative around the brand evolution. I have a few questions, if I may," Derek said, his voice the reasonable, thoughtful tone I remembered from client meetings years ago, the tone that preceded devastating critiques. "Of course," I replied, bracing myself. What followed was a masterclass in subtle undermining. Derek didn't openly criticize our work. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he asked questions that planted seeds of doubt about implementation challenges, potential customer confusion, competitor differentiation. Each question was framed as helpful exploration rather than criticism, but the cumulative effect was to introduce uncertainty about our concepts. "These are excellent points to consider," I responded, addressing each question with confident, detailed answers. I refused to show any sign that his presence rattled me. After the Q&A, as we packed up our materials, the marketing director approached me. "Great presentation. Very solid concepts. We'll be making our decision by the end of next week. Thank you for the opportunity, I replied professionally. We're excited about the possibility of partnering with you on this transformation. As the clients filed out, Derek lingered. My team gave us space, sensing tension but unaware of its nature or history. Successful little agency you've built, he said quietly when we were effectively alone. Quite an achievement after such a challenging period in your life. I met his gaze directly. What exactly are you doing, Derek? His smile was all innocence. Consulting. It's what I do these days. Financial institutions hire me to evaluate their brand strategy and customer psychology. I'm good at understanding what motivates people, how they think, what they hide. The threat was thinly veiled. I'm sure you are. Well, it was an unexpected surprise seeing you today. I should join my team. As I turned to leave, he spoke again. One question, Emily. How long did it take you to plan it all? The placement at Blackwell, befriending Sophia, those anonymous tips that were just specific enough to trigger investigations? Was it immediately after we broke up, or did the idea come to you gradually? I stopped but didn't turn around, my blood running cold. He knew. Somehow he had pieced it together. I don't know what you're talking about, I said evenly. But I do know that attempting to interfere with my business out of some misplaced resentment over a relationship that ended years ago reflects poorly on your professionalism. Resentment? He laughed softly. No, Emily. I'm impressed. It was masterfully done. I didn't see it until much later, how completely you orchestrated my professional and personal destruction. It's only in the past year that I've managed to put all the pieces together. I turned to face him, careful to keep my expression neutral. You destroyed yourself, Derek. Your financial fraud, your manipulation of colleagues, your treatment of Sophia, those were your choices, not mine. True, he acknowledged with disturbing calm. But the timing, the precise targeting of each revelation, that was all you. The coincidences were too perfect. Sophia ending our relationship just as my career imploded. Anonymous tips with information only someone close to me would know. A design consultant raising compliance concerns about exactly my client materials. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I underestimated you, Emily. I thought I'd broken you, but instead I created something fascinating. Someone cold enough, patient enough, to spend nearly a year systematically dismantling my life without ever revealing herself. I maintained my composure with effort. I think you're giving me far too much credit and taking far too little responsibility for your own actions. Perhaps, he conceded, but we both know the truth. And now I'm curious about what happens next. Nothing happens next, I said firmly. We're both different people now with separate lives. Let's keep it that way. His smile didn't reach his eyes. That's one option. We should discuss the others sometime. Coffee next week? No. I'll be providing my evaluation of the presentations to the bank tomorrow. He continued as if I hadn't spoken. Your concepts were quite good, technically. Would be a shame if psychological factors made them less viable. The threat was explicit now. Are you actually threatening to sabotage my company's pitch unless I meet with you? Not at all. I'm simply suggesting that a professional conversation between two people with a long history might be beneficial. He handed me a business card. Tuesday, 10 a.m., the cafe on the corner of Pike and 4th. I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. He left before I could respond, the business card heavy in my hand like a loaded weapon. Outside the building, my team waited by our company car. Everything okay? My creative director asked. You look like you've seen a ghost. In many ways I had. I'm fine. That consultant was someone I knew years ago. It was surprising to see him in this context. He seemed to have some issues with our concept foundations. She noted with concern. That's his job, to challenge assumptions and identify weaknesses, I replied, slipping into my professional tone. We handled his questions well. Let's get back to the office and prepare for any follow-up requests. That evening, I told Michael about Derek's appearance at the pitch meeting and his implied threat regarding the contract. That can't be legal, Michael said, pacing our living room. He's essentially blackmailing you. Without saying anything explicitly actionable, I pointed out. He's too smart for that. So what are you going to do? Meet with him? I had been considering this question all afternoon. I don't see that I have much choice. This contract would transform my business. I can't risk losing it because Derek wants to play power games. I don't like it, Michael said firmly. Meeting him alone gives him exactly what he wants. Access to you, the chance to manipulate you again. I won't be manipulated, I assured him. That part of my life is over. I just need to understand what he's after and neutralize whatever threat he's planning. Michael sat beside me on the couch, taking my hands in his. I know you're capable of handling him. I'm not questioning that. I just hate seeing him force his way back into your life when you've worked so hard to build something beautiful without him. I rested my head on his shoulder. I know. But I've faced worse than a coffee meeting with Derek Matthews. At least let me come with you, he suggested. I'll sit at another table, just be nearby in case things get uncomfortable. I considered this. Having Michael there would certainly provide security, but it might also escalate the situation if Derek felt cornered or challenged. Let me handle this first meeting alone. If there's a second one, which I hope there won't be, we can discuss you joining. Michael reluctantly agreed, though his concern was evident. Tuesday morning arrived with uncomfortable swiftness. I dressed carefully, a structured blazer over a simple blouse and tailored pants, professional and confident without appearing to have made special effort. The goal was to project success and indifference to Derek's opinion. The cafe was busy with morning customers when I arrived precisely at 10 a.m. Derek was already seated at a corner table, 2 cups of coffee in front of him. As I approached, I noted that he had ordered my preferred drink, an almond milk latte with an extra shot. The fact that he remembered such a detail after years apart was unsettling. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I wasn't sure you would." "Let's be clear," I said, remaining standing. "I'm here because you implied you would sabotage my company's chances at a major contract if I didn't come. So explain what you want, and then we can both get on with our lives." He smiled slightly. "Please sit down. I promise this conversation will benefit us both." I sat reluctantly, leaving my coffee untouched. "I'm listening." Derek leaned back, studying me with an intensity I remembered all too well. "You've done remarkably well for yourself. The design agency, the engagement to the architect. Michael, isn't it? A complete reinvention from the woman I knew." "People change," I said flatly. "What do you want, Derek?" Direct as always. He paused. "I want to propose a partnership." Whatever I had expected, it wasn't that. "A partnership," I repeated incredulously. "Between us? That's absurd." "Is it? We're both excellent at what we do. You understand visual communication and brand strategy. I understand human psychology and financial motivations. Together we could offer something unique to clients." I stared at him, trying to discern the real agenda behind this outlandish suggestion. "You can't possibly be serious. After everything that happened between us, why would you even suggest working together?" "Because we're more alike than you want to admit," he said, leaning forward. "What you did to me, the meticulous planning, the patient execution, the comprehensive scope, it was impressive, Emily. I recognize myself in your methods." "I am nothing like you," I said coldly. "No?" His eyebrow raised. "You cultivated a friendship with Sophia specifically to gain intelligence and influence. You positioned yourself strategically in my professional circle. You identified vulnerabilities and exploited them systematically. You watched as I self-destructed, moving each piece into place with perfect timing." He smiled. "It was beautifully calculated. I couldn't have done it better myself." Each word felt like a slap. Not because he was wrong, but because hearing my actions described in his voice made them sound exactly like something he would do. The comparison made me physically nauseous. "The difference," I said carefully, "is that I was responding to actual harm you had caused. You manipulated and abused me for years. You defrauded me financially. You isolated me from friends and family. Everything that happened to you afterward was the consequence of your own actions and choices. The motivations differ," he acknowledged. "But the methodologies align. We both understand how to identify weaknesses and leverage them. We both know how to play the long game." He leaned closer. "Imagine what we could accomplish together instead of against each other." "Never," I said without hesitation. "Now, if threatening my business was your only reason for this meeting, we're done here." "Not quite," Derek replied, his tone shifting subtly. "There's also the matter of your fiancé." My blood ran cold. "Leave Michael out of this." "I'd like to, but he should probably know what kind of woman he's marrying, don't you think? The calculating strategist who befriended his ex's new girlfriend to gather intelligence? Who systematically engineered a man's professional and personal destruction over the course of a year? Who is capable of such comprehensive deception?" The threat was explicit now. "Are you blackmailing me?" "I prefer to think of it as negotiation. You have something I want, access to your client network, your design expertise, your unique perspective. I have something you want, discretion about certain aspects of your past that might concern your fiancé or clients." I had underestimated Derek once again. This wasn't about revenge or simple disruption. It was about leveraging what he knew to force a partnership that would benefit him professionally. After years in the wilderness of lower-level consulting, he saw my successful agency as his ticket back to the financial sector's inner circles. Even if I agreed, which I absolutely will not, no one would hire us together. Your reputation in the financial sector is destroyed. My reputation suffered, yes, he conceded. But memories are short when results are good. With your design firm's credibility and my psychological insights, we could offer something unique. You know I'm excellent at presenting myself as whatever clients need me to be. That was certainly true. Derek's chameleon-like ability to adapt to others' expectations had been one of his most effective manipulation tools. The answer is no, I said firmly. I will not partner with you, professionally or otherwise. As for your threats, do your worst. Michael knows about our history. Does he know everything? Derek challenged. The full extent of your revenge campaign? The calculated befriending of Sophia? The anonymous tips timed for maximum damage. Somehow I doubt you've shared those particular details with your architect. He was right, and we both knew it. I had told Michael about Derek's emotional abuse and financial fraud. I had even admitted to reporting his financial misconduct after our breakup, but I had never revealed the full scope of Project Karma, the methodical, year-long campaign to dismantle Derek's life piece by piece. You're overplaying your hand, I said, fighting to maintain my composure. Even if you told Michael everything you suspect about my actions, it would be your word against mine. The bitter ex-boyfriend making wild accusations about a revenge conspiracy? That's not exactly credible. Perhaps not on its own, Derek agreed. But I've been gathering evidence for quite some time. Records of your contract with Blackwell that coincided perfectly with my professional troubles. Testimony from former colleagues who remembered your specific questions about my client presentations. The curious timing of Sophia ending our relationship just as anonymous tips reached my firm. He reached into his briefcase and extracted a folder. Most damning is this: records from the private investigator you hired. He was quite helpful once I explained that I was looking into potential corporate espionage involving my former girlfriend. My stomach dropped. I had paid the investigator in cash specifically to avoid creating a paper trail, but I hadn't considered that Derek might approach him directly. None of this proves anything illegal, I said, though my confidence was wavering. I reported actual misconduct. Your downfall was the result of your own actions. True, he acknowledged, but context matters. When your fiancé learns that you spent nearly a year methodically orchestrating a campaign against me, while telling him it was simply reporting fraud, how will he view you? When your clients discover that you strategically positioned yourself in their competitor's firm to gather intelligence, will they trust your ethics? When the design community hears that you cultivated a friendship with Sophia specifically to leverage against me, what will that do to your professional reputation? The threat was comprehensive and devastating, not because Derek could prove illegal activity, but because revealing the full truth of Project Karma would force everyone in my life to reevaluate who they thought I was. The calculated, patient strategist who had dismantled Derek's life was a far cry from the resilient survivor I had presented to the world afterward. What exactly do you want? I asked, my voice steady despite my internal panic. Initially, a consulting role with your agency. You'll bring me in as a specialist in financial consumer psychology. Over time, we'll establish a more formal partnership structure. He smiled. I'll even sign a contract with behavior clauses if that makes you more comfortable. And if I refuse? Then I'll share what I know with Michael first, then with your most significant clients, then with the design community more broadly. He shrugged. I don't particularly want to do that. It's much more advantageous for both of us to work together. I stood abruptly. I need time to think. Of course, he said smoothly. Take 48 hours. I'll expect your call by Thursday morning with your decision. He handed me another business card with his number. I truly hope you'll make the practical choice, Emily. We could be quite extraordinary together. I left without another word, walking several blocks before the trembling in my legs forced me to sit on a park bench. The beautiful spring day continued around me, people walking dogs, office workers enjoying coffee breaks, students sprawled on the grass studying, all oblivious to the fact that my carefully constructed life was on the verge of implosion. For the first time in years, I felt the same helpless panic that had overwhelmed me when Derek first walked out of our apartment. Once again, he had positioned himself to destroy what I valued most, not through direct attack, but through leveraging my own actions against me. The irony was excruciating. My elaborate revenge had created the very vulnerability he was now exploiting. By becoming the calculating strategist necessary to dismantle Derek's life, I had given him the perfect weapon to use against me years later. I called Michael and asked him to meet me at home as soon as possible. This wasn't a conversation for text messages or hurried phone calls. If I was going to lose everything, I needed to at least try to save what mattered most: my relationship with the man I loved. Michael arrived home an hour later, concern evident in his expression as he found me sitting at our kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold mug of tea. "What happened?" he asked, taking the seat across from me. "What did Derek want?" I took a deep breath. "Before I tell you that, there's something I need to explain about my history with Derek. Something I've never told you or anyone else." Over the next hour, I detailed the full extent of Project Karma, the comprehensive research, the strategic positioning at Blackwell, my calculated friendship with Sophia, the coordinated anonymous tips, the deliberate timing of revelations for maximum impact. I explained how thoroughly I had planned and executed Derek's destruction, driven by a cold determination that had consumed me for nearly a year. Michael listened without interrupting, his expression increasingly troubled as the full picture emerged. When I finally fell silent, he stood and walked to the window, his back to me as he processed what he'd heard. "So all this time," he said eventually, "when you described reporting Derek's financial fraud as an act of necessary justice, you were actually describing a systematic campaign to destroy him professionally and personally." "Yes," I admitted. "I didn't just report his fraud. I orchestrated his complete downfall." He turned to face me. "Why didn't you tell me this before? We've been together for years, Emily. We're engaged to be married." I was ashamed, I said honestly. Not of ensuring Derek faced consequences for what he'd done to me, but of how completely I allowed revenge to consume me. The person I became during that year, calculating, manipulative, coldly strategic, that's not who I want to be. By the time we met, I had put that part of myself away. "I didn't want you to know her, but she's still part of you," Michael said quietly. "You proved that today by immediately analyzing Derek's threat in terms of vulnerabilities and counter-strategies. I couldn't deny it. Even as Derek was threatening me, part of my mind had been cataloging potential responses, identifying his weaknesses, calculating odds of various outcomes. Yes, I acknowledged, that capacity is still there. But I choose not to let it define me anymore." Michael was silent for a long moment. "And now Derek is threatening to reveal all this unless you partner with him professionally?" "Yes. He believes our combined skills would be valuable to clients. In reality, he wants access to my client network and the credibility my firm would give him to rebuild his reputation in the financial sector." "And you're considering it?" His voice held an edge I'd never heard before. "No," I said firmly. "I would never partner with Derek. I'm just trying to figure out how to neutralize his threat without destroying everything I've built, including us." "What exactly does he have? Real evidence or just circumstantial connections?" "Mostly circumstantial, but compelling when viewed together. Records from the private investigator I hired. Timeline coincidences that are difficult to explain as random. Testimony from former colleagues about specific questions I asked." Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I recognized. "And what happens if you refuse and he follows through on his threat? Worst case scenario?" I had been calculating this since leaving the cafe. "Worst case? You decide you can't trust me and end our engagement. My largest clients question my ethics and terminate their contracts. Potential clients hear rumors and avoid working with my firm. The design community views me as manipulative and untrustworthy." I swallowed hard. "In short, personal and professional devastation. That's the scorched earth result." Michael agreed. "But let's be realistic. Much of what Derek is threatening relies on people believing him, a man with a destroyed reputation making accusations against a woman who has built a successful business and solid relationships. That's not particularly compelling on its face." I hadn't considered this perspective. "You think people wouldn't believe him?" "I think context matters," Michael said, sitting back across from me. "Derek emotionally abused you for years. He committed financial fraud against you. He systematically destroyed your self-worth and support systems. In response, you ensured he faced consequences for actual misconduct he had committed." He reached across the table to take my hands. "Was your approach calculating?" "Yes." "Comprehensive?" "Absolutely. But you didn't fabricate evidence or make false accusations. You simply ensured that his actual misdeeds were exposed at the most damaging possible time. Put that way, it sounded less like ruthless revenge and more like strategic justice. So you're not disgusted with me for becoming someone capable of such calculated actions? Emily, Michael said gently, I've always known you were capable of extraordinary focus and determination. It's part of what I love about you. The fact that you channeled those qualities toward ensuring an abuser faced consequences doesn't make you a villain. It makes you a survivor who refused to be a victim. Tears welled in my eyes. I was so afraid you'd see me differently, as manipulative, vengeful, cold. What I see is a woman who used every resource available to achieve justice when normal channels were insufficient. Was it extreme? Perhaps. But so was the harm done to you. He squeezed my hands. The difference between you and Derek is fundamental. He used manipulation to harm innocent people for personal gain. You used strategic thinking to ensure a guilty person faced appropriate consequences. The relief I felt was overwhelming. Even if Michael couldn't fully accept what I had done, he understood it in a context I hadn't allowed myself to consider, as a necessary response to extraordinary harm rather than a moral failing on my part. So what do we do about Derek's threats? I asked, feeling stronger now that I knew Michael was still in my corner. We don't negotiate with him, that's certain, Michael said firmly. Bringing him into your business would be disastrous in every way. He'd eventually try to take control, undermine you with clients, and possibly access sensitive information he could leverage later. Agreed. But if we refuse, he'll likely follow through on his threats. Michael nodded thoughtfully. Then we need to preempt him. The power of his threat lies in revealing something you've kept hidden. If you control the narrative by disclosing it first, on your own terms, he loses that power. The strategy was sound but terrifying. You're suggesting I publicly admit to orchestrating Derek's downfall? That could still damage my professional reputation. Not publicly necessarily. Selectively, to the people whose opinion matters most. And framed properly, not as revenge but as the strategic response of a survivor ensuring justice. I considered this approach. Michael was right that controlling the narrative would neutralize much of Derek's threat, but selective disclosure required careful planning regarding who needed to know what and how the information should be framed. I need to tell Sophia the complete truth, I said, thinking aloud. She deserves to know that our friendship began strategically, even though it became genuine. And I should probably speak with my core team at the agency. They need to understand why Derek might target our business. What about the bank client? The one where Derek threatened to sabotage your pitch? I weighed the risks. That's trickier. Telling them might raise questions about my ethics that could cost us the contract. Not telling them leaves us vulnerable if Derek approaches them directly. Could you speak with just the marketing director? Frame it as full disclosure about a past relationship that might create a conflict of interest with their consultant. That approach had merit. It would appear ethical and transparent without unnecessarily exposing all the details of Project Karma. I'll need to be careful about how much I reveal to each person, I said. Enough to contextualize whatever Derek might say, but without providing unnecessary details that could be misinterpreted. Exactly, Michael agreed. And I'll be with you every step of the way. We spent the rest of the evening developing a strategy for controlled disclosure. By midnight, we had a plan for approaching each key person in my life with appropriately tailored information about my history with Derek. The goal wasn't to reveal everything to everyone, but to provide enough context that Derek's accusations would seem like the bitter allegations of a disgraced ex rather than shocking revelations. The next morning, I began with Sophia, inviting her to meet at a private corner of a cafe we rarely frequented, neutral territory where we were unlikely to encounter mutual acquaintances. Thank you for meeting on such short notice, I said when she arrived. There's something important I need to tell you, and I wanted you to hear it from me directly. She looked concerned as she settled across from me. This sounds serious. It is. I took a deep breath. You know that Derek and I had a relationship before you met him. What I haven't told you is that our friendship, yours and mine, didn't begin by chance. After Derek's emotional and financial abuse, I deliberately positioned myself at Blackwell where I might encounter you, with the specific intention of gathering information I could use against him. Her expression froze, pain flashing in her eyes. So our entire friendship was, what? A surveillance operation? It began that way, I admitted. But it evolved into something genuine, Sophia. The connection we formed, the conversations we shared, those were real. I didn't fabricate my personality or my care for you, just your motivations for befriending me in the first place, she said sharply. Do you have any idea how violating that feels? To learn that someone you trusted approached you with a hidden agenda. I do, actually, I said quietly. Derek did the same to me when we met. His interest, his charm, his apparent support, all calculated to gain my trust and access my resources. The difference is that while his agenda remained exploitative, mine shifted. I came to value our friendship for its own sake, independent of any information about Derek. She was silent for a long moment, absorbing this. Why are you telling me this now? After all this time? Because Derek has resurfaced with threats to reveal this information himself, along with other details about how I ensured he faced consequences for his actions. I wanted you to hear the truth from me, not as accusations from him. I explained Derek's appearance at my client pitch and his subsequent blackmail attempt, watching the range of emotions cross her face: shock, anger, vindication, and finally, a grim understanding. He's trying to regain control, she said, more to herself than to me. Classic Derek. If he can't succeed legitimately, he'll leverage whatever he can against those who have. Yes, I agreed, relieved that she recognized the pattern. I'm refusing his demands, which means he'll likely follow through on his threats. I wanted you to be prepared in case he approaches you with revelations about my motives. She studied me intently. You orchestrated his professional collapse, didn't you? It wasn't just reporting his fraud. You systematically ensured he lost everything. I nodded. After what he did to me, the emotional abuse, the isolation, the financial fraud, normal channels of justice seemed inadequate. So yes, I strategically positioned myself to gather evidence of his misconduct and ensured it reached the right people at the most damaging possible time. Instead of the disgust or anger I had feared, Sophia's expression reflected something closer to grudging respect. You know what's strangest about this? Part of me almost admires the justice of it. He systematically dismantled your life using manipulation and strategic control. You returned the favor using his own methods against him. That comparison isn't entirely comfortable for me, I admitted. The idea that I operated like Derek, even temporarily. The methods may have similarities, but the context is entirely different, she pointed out. You were responding to harm, not initiating it for personal gain. She sighed. I'm still hurt and angry about how our friendship began. That's going to take time to process. But I understand why you're telling me now, and I appreciate the honesty. That's more than I deserve, I said sincerely. I wouldn't blame you if you walked away from our friendship entirely. I haven't decided what I want yet, she replied candidly. But I do know that I won't help Derek in whatever game he's playing now. If he contacts me again, I'll make it clear that I'm not interested in his version of events. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a reprieve, and more than I had dared hope for. Next, I met with my core team at Chen Design Group, my creative director, operations manager, and lead strategist. These three had been with me since the early days of the company and had earned my trust completely. I explained my history with Derek in carefully measured terms, acknowledging a strategic approach to ensuring he faced consequences for his abuse and fraud, without detailing the full extent of Project Karma. He's now attempting to leverage this past connection to damage our company's reputation and client relationships, I explained. Specifically, he's positioned himself to influence the bank contract decision and is threatening to share damaging interpretations of my past actions unless I bring him into the business. My creative director responded immediately, "That's extortion. We should report him." It's carefully worded to avoid being legally actionable, I clarified. And engaging him legally would simply create a public spectacle that could harm the agency regardless of outcome. So what's our strategy? My strategist asked practically. Controlled disclosure. I'm speaking directly with key relationships to provide context for any allegations Derek might make. And absolute refusal of his demands. Will this affect the bank pitch? My operations manager asked, getting to the heart of the business concern. Possibly, I acknowledged. I'll be speaking with their marketing director today to disclose my past connection with Derek and the potential conflict of interest his involvement creates. How they respond will determine next steps. My team's support was immediate and unequivocal. They had witnessed the growth of the agency from its beginning, had benefited from its success, and were personally loyal in a way I found profoundly touching. Whatever you need from us, you've got it, my creative director assured me. This agency is built on your vision and integrity. One bitter ex with a grudge isn't going to change that. Their confidence strengthened my resolve for the most challenging conversation with the bank's marketing director. I requested an urgent meeting, framing it as an ethical disclosure matter that couldn't wait. Mark Donovan, the marketing director, agreed to meet at a coffee shop near his office that afternoon. He greeted me with the friendly professionalism that had characterized our interactions throughout the pitch process. "This sounded important," he said after we had coffee in front of us. "I hope there's no issue with your proposal. The executive team was very impressed." "The proposal stands exactly as presented," I assured him. "This meeting concerns a potential conflict of interest that I believe you should be aware of before making your final decision." I explained my past relationship with Derek Matthews, keeping the details appropriately professional, while making it clear that it had ended badly and involved financial impropriety on his part. I did not mention my systematic revenge, instead focusing on the potential conflict his involvement as a consultant created. "I was surprised to see him involved in your evaluation process," I concluded. "While I'm confident in the quality of our work and presentation, I felt it was important to disclose this past connection so your team can consider whether it constitutes a conflict of interest." Mark looked troubled. "I appreciate your transparency, Emily. Derek was brought in at the recommendation of one of our VPs who worked with him briefly at his new consulting practice. Had I known about this history, I would have flagged the potential conflict immediately." "I understand these situations can be complicated," I said carefully. "I simply wanted to ensure you had all relevant information." "If you don't mind my asking," Mark said, "did Derek mention your past relationship during our internal evaluation discussion after your presentation?" "Not to my knowledge," I replied truthfully. Our interaction was limited to his questions about our concepts, which appeared to be aimed at raising concerns about their effectiveness. Mark's expression darkened. "That's deeply problematic from an ethical standpoint. He had a clear obligation to disclose a past personal relationship that might influence his professional assessment." This was an angle I hadn't specifically anticipated, but immediately recognized as advantageous. Derek's failure to disclose our past relationship to the bank constituted an ethical breach in his consulting role, one that could potentially undermine his credibility with them entirely. "I'll need to discuss this with our executive team immediately," Mark continued. "At minimum, we'll need to exclude Derek's evaluation from our decision-making process. More likely, we'll terminate his consulting arrangement entirely." "I understand this creates complications for your selection process," I said. "I want to assure you that regardless of your decision about our proposal, bringing this to your attention was simply an ethical obligation on my part, and one that reflects well on you and your agency," Mark replied. "Transparency about potential conflicts, even when it might disadvantage you commercially, speaks to the integrity we're looking for in a long-term partner." By the time I left the meeting, I felt cautiously optimistic. Rather than damaging our chances at the contract, my disclosure appeared to have enhanced our credibility while simultaneously undermining Derek's position with the bank. I called Michael immediately to update him on my progress with the controlled disclosure strategy. "It's going better than I expected," I told him. "Sophia is hurt but understanding, my team is completely supportive, and the bank is likely to terminate Derek's involvement entirely." "That's excellent," Michael said, relieved. "Have you heard anything from Derek?" "Not yet. His 48-hour deadline isn't up until tomorrow morning." I checked my watch. I should head home. There's one more call I need to make today, and I'd rather do it with you there. The final call on my list was to the private investigator Derek had mentioned, the one who had allegedly shared information about our previous engagement. I needed to understand exactly what Derek knew and what evidence he might actually possess. At home, with Michael beside me for moral support, I called the number I hadn't dialed in years. To my surprise, Martin Reeves answered personally. "Ms. Reynolds," he said when I identified myself. "I've been expecting your call." "Have you?" I kept my tone neutral. "May I ask why?" "Your ex-boyfriend paid me a visit about 3 months ago. Asked a lot of questions about the work I did for you years back. Claimed he was investigating potential corporate espionage involving both of you." "And what did you tell him?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "Nothing specific," Reeves replied. "Client confidentiality is sacred in my business." But he already knew enough details that I figured somebody had been talking. Probably someone at that financial firm where the girlfriend worked. Relief washed over me. "So you didn't share my reports or confirm that I hired you to investigate Derek?" "Course not. But he did tell me an interesting story about how you supposedly orchestrated his professional downfall using information I gathered for you. Said he had evidence and was building a case." "Did he show you this evidence?" "Tried to. I wasn't interested." "Look, Ms. Reynolds, what clients do with the information I provide isn't my business, but I wanted you to know he was asking questions. Would have called you myself if you hadn't reached out. I appreciate that, I said sincerely. Did he mention anything specific he was trying to prove or document? Just that stuff about you plotting his ruin. Seemed obsessed with the idea that you'd planned it all meticulously. Reeves paused. Between us, he came across as someone with a serious grudge looking to justify it. Made me glad I have a policy against sharing client information. After thanking Reeves for his discretion, I ended the call feeling considerably lighter. Derek was bluffing, I told Michael. The investigator didn't share anything with him. He's pieced together a theory based on circumstantial connections, but he doesn't have the smoking gun he implied. So his evidence is essentially that your strategic moves coincided with his downfall? Michael asked. That's hardly conclusive. Exactly. It might raise questions if shared broadly, but without confirmation from key participants like the investigator or Sophia, it remains speculation from a disgraced ex-boyfriend. Michael pulled me into an embrace. You've handled this brilliantly, Emily. Facing it head-on, controlling the narrative, verifying his claims. Instead of being victimized by his threats, you've completely neutralized them. His praise warmed me, but I remained cautious. He'll still try something when I refuse his partnership demand tomorrow. Derek doesn't accept defeat gracefully. Whatever he tries, we'll face it together, Michael promised. You're not alone this time. The next morning, precisely at the 48-hour deadline Derek had imposed, I called his number. He answered on the first ring, his tone smugly expectant. Emily, I've been looking forward to your call. I trust you've made the practical decision? I have, I replied evenly. The answer is no. I will not partner with you, professionally or personally, now or ever. His momentary silence conveyed his surprise better than words could have. I don't think you understand the consequences of that decision. By this afternoon, your fiancé, your clients, and your professional network will all know exactly what kind of calculating operator you really are. You're welcome to try, I said calmly. But before you do, you should know that I've already spoken with Sophia, my team at Chen Design, and the marketing director at First National Bank. I've disclosed our past relationship and the context of your current threats. I've also confirmed with Martin Reeves that he shared no information about my investigation with you, contrary to your claims. Another silence, longer this time. You're bluffing, he finally said, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. I'm not. I've controlled the narrative, Derek. Whatever accusations you make now will simply reinforce what I've already explained, that a disgraced ex-boyfriend is attempting to retaliate against me because I ensured he faced consequences for his actual misconduct years ago. You think you've won? He said, anger finally breaking through his composed facade. Just like last time, the righteous victim ensuring justice is served. No, I corrected him. I'm simply refusing to be victimized again. There's a difference. This isn't over, he warned. You've made an enemy you can't afford, Emily. I still have information, connections. Goodbye, Derek. I interrupted. Don't contact me again. Any further attempts at communication or intimidation will be documented and shared with appropriate authorities. I ended the call before he could respond, then turned to Michael, who had been sitting beside me throughout the conversation. He'll try something else, I said. This isn't over. Maybe not, Michael acknowledged, but you've stripped him of his leverage. Whatever he tries next, he'll be operating from a position of weakness, not strength. 3 days later, I received official notification that Chen Design Group had been selected for the bank's rebranding project, the largest contract in our company's history. Mark Donovan called personally to inform me that Derek Matthews had been terminated as a consultant immediately after our coffee shop conversation, due to his failure to disclose a significant conflict of interest. A week passed with no further contact from Derek, then 2. I maintained vigilance, warning my team to report any unusual client interactions or suspicious inquiries about our work. But as days turned into weeks with no sign of retaliation, I gradually allowed myself to believe that perhaps Derek had recognized his defeat and retreated. It was Sophia who eventually brought news of Derek's next move, calling me on a Friday afternoon 6 weeks after my rejection of his partnership demand. I thought you should know, she said without preamble. Derek's leaving the city. He accepted a position with a marketing firm in Chicago. How do you know? I asked, surprised not by the information but by its source. He emailed me, she replied. Said he wanted to apologize for his behavior during and after our relationship, that he's started therapy and is trying to make amends before leaving for a fresh start. She paused. It seemed genuinely remorseful, but with Derek, everything is calculated. I finished for her. Did he mention me? Only to say he regretted his recent actions and hoped I wouldn't judge you harshly for past events between you two. It was carefully worded, nothing that could be construed as admission of his threats, but clearly referencing your history. After we ended the call, I sat at my desk, processing this unexpected development. Was Derek's departure genuine capitulation, or another strategic move in a longer game? Was the apparent contrition real, or just another manipulation? I realized with quiet surprise that I didn't particularly care. Whether Derek had given up or was simply retreating to plan another approach, he no longer held power over my emotions or my future. I had faced his worst threat, exposure of my most questionable actions, and emerged intact, with my relationships and business not just surviving, but strengthened by the transparency the crisis had forced. That evening, Michael and I finalized the guest list for our wedding, scheduled for the following spring. As we reviewed names and addresses, I felt a profound sense of peace. The woman I had become, someone capable of both strategic thinking and genuine connection, both fierce protection of her interests and vulnerable honesty with those she loved, was not defined by either Derek's abuse or my response to it. She was simply and completely me. Shaped by experience but not limited by it, capable of calculated action but guided by compassion and ethics, strong enough to protect herself but wise enough to accept support. 6 months later, as I prepared to walk down the aisle toward Michael, my father squeezed my hand and whispered, "I've never seen you look so happy, Emily." I smiled, thinking of the journey that had led me to this moment. I am happy. Completely. As we began our walk, I caught sight of Sophia seated midway down the aisle. Our friendship had survived my disclosure, emerging different but in many ways stronger for its newfound honesty. She smiled and gave me a small nod that conveyed both congratulations and understanding. I had learned that true strength isn't found in perfect invulnerability or ruthless strategy, but in the courage to be authentic even when it's frightening. The woman who had methodically executed Project Karma was still part of me, but she no longer defined me. Michael waited at the altar, his face illuminated with a love that needed no calculation or strategic maintenance. As I reached him and took his hands in mine, I knew with absolute certainty that Derek had been wrong about the most important thing of all. Someone did love me, completely, genuinely, and without manipulation. And I loved in return, with a heart that had been broken but had healed stronger at the broken places. In that moment, standing before our gathered friends and family, I silently thanked Derek Matthews, not for the pain he had caused, but for being so catastrophically wrong. His cruelty had ultimately led me here, to a life richer and more authentic than I could have imagined during those dark days after he walked out. "No one will ever love you," he had said with such cruel certainty. I looked into Michael's eyes as we began our vows and thought, this is the sweetest revenge of all, to prove him wrong by living joyfully.